Good afternoon, dear participants of today's webinar. Today, we are going to talk about enhancing the quality of students' experience. And this is such an important theme because students are at the heart of everything that we do in education. And of course, effectiveness of student engagement and the quality of student experience is directly linked and is integral part of quality of education and of its relevance. And as we know, with all large-scale reforms in Uzbekistan in higher education, students' experience and the quality of it is so important. And today we're running this webinar as part of our higher education program in Uzbekistan that we run in close partnership with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education of Uzbekistan, Higher Education Council of Uzbekistan, El Yurtumide Foundation, and supported by Uzbek Embassy in London. And our UK partner on this program is a leading education company in the UK called Advance HE. So participants of today's webinar are Pro-Vice Chancellors of all universities in Uzbekistan, all national education reform project teams, researchers and scholars, and candidates of El Yurtumide Foundation. We have a wide range of participants, including education sector, but also we have representatives of industry partners and wider stakeholders that are working with higher education institutions here in Uzbekistan. And I'm delighted to introduce three of our speakers today. Ben Braben, who is Advanced HE Associate, Fiona Shelton, Head of Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching, University of Derby, and John Hill, Head of Library and Digital Learning of the same university. So over to you. And during our session today, we will also have representatives of the ministry. They will be joining us shortly. But now over to our three keynote speakers to kick off the discussion. And in terms of housekeeping, I would again encourage you to use the interpretation button and to choose Russian in Uzbekistan and English for our UK participants. I'm also asking all of you to leave your questions in the chat, and we will be dealing with them in the course of our discussion. But now over to you, Ben, to introduce the team and to kick off the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jamila. Thank you for that introduction. As you said, my name is Ben Braben, and I am going to be chairing the session on behalf of Advance HE. I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words about our speakers today and a little bit about the context of the session today before handing over to Fiona and John. So today, as you said, we have Fiona Shelton, Dr. Fiona Shelton, who is head of the Centre for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at the University of Derby. In terms of Fiona's role, she oversees a number of different teams, including pedagogic practice team, technology enhanced learning team, social mobility unit. She has over 26 years of experience. She's a UK National Teaching Fellow. She has specific research interests that span education from primary right up to higher education, with a particular focus on gender and education, but also a focus on international perspectives on education as well. John Hill, also from the University of Derby, heads up digital learning and also the library services. And his focus on digital education, as you can imagine, has been particularly important over the last 12 months or so. But in terms of focus, there are four areas that John is particularly concerned with. That's digital practice, digital capability, digital infrastructure, and also data and research informed approaches. And combined together, we have an excellent team here who are going to talk more about the student experience, and particularly the experience at the University of Derby. And Derby is, for those of you who are not familiar, I would describe it as a modern, bold university who as an institution is very much focused on realizing the potential of all students, adopting a very inclusive approach. And you may know that they are gold rated for the teaching excellence framework in the UK. They are #1 in the UK for social and community impact. They are #1 in the UK for social mobility, and they are also #1 in the UK for the National Education's Network Awards. So very much speaking to the needs of our students. Without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Fiona and John to take you into our topic today and to look more at the student experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that introduction and for introducing the University of Derby as well. Salam, good afternoon, everybody. We're very pleased to be here, and we're very pleased to be able to share with you some of the approaches that we take and have been taking and will still be taking at the University of Derby in order to take that holistic view of student success, which is right at the heart of our mission as a university. So to introduce the session and what we're going to be covering today, we would like to talk a little bit about our approach. We're going to talk about the regulatory landscape that we find ourselves in as an institution, as all UK institutions. We will talk to you about the ways in which we engage our students in getting their feedback, in our students as partners, and the student journey. And then we're going to move into a very specific project that we've been working on with Advance HE, which is the Advance HE Student Success Framework, and how we have been using that in order to improve the student experience at the University of Derby. John will talk you through that, through the project that we've done, and through our new blended applied learning model that we've introduced as a result of the pandemic. And then we'll talk to you about any next steps that we're planning to take. And we hope to leave time at the end for some questions and answers so that we can talk to you and answer any questions that you might have about our approach. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the University of Derby. So as Ben said, we are a modern university. We gained our university status in 1992, but our heritage is rooted with over 170 years of training teachers. So the University of Derby, whilst it wasn't called the university 170 years ago, it does have a very strong position within the city of Derby. Derby is an industrial city, and we have many global companies, some of which you will recognise, such as Rolls-Royce, perhaps Royal Crown Derby, and we're also very well known in Derby for our railway engineering. And we build our learning and teaching approach around our region's heritage in terms of innovation and in terms of providing industry relevant and focused learning and teaching with applied and relevant outcomes for our students. As Ben said, we're rated gold in the Teaching Excellence and Student Outcomes Framework. We've invested over £200 million in the last 10 years in our facilities, and that includes in our learning spaces, in our social spaces, in the spaces that our students have to do extra and co-curricular activities. And we are very applied in terms of the nature of our learning and teaching. So from an employability perspective, our culture of real world learning means that employers are engaged in our approaches that we take in the university to ensure that our students get the very best possible start when they leave university and go to take up their first post. We do have expert teaching staff who are industry experts, and they have a wealth of experience and bring great links with employers. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we're talking about one of the student success frameworks. So a little bit more about the University of Derby. If you move to the next slide, John, thank you. So we have a strategic framework which I'll share with you in a moment, but at the heart of that, we have a quotation in there, which is to empower people to achieve their potential and make a positive contribution to society. And at the heart of that is our students. However, it's also about our region. You can see here that we're a relatively large higher education provider. Across the whole of our provision, we have about 29,000 students, and the majority of our undergraduate students have studied in state schools. So we have what is called a widening participation university. We bring students in from disadvantaged backgrounds, and we give them a really good start in the whole of their student journey so that they get the jobs that they come to get and realise their aspirations. Our undergraduate provision, you can see there, we have about 20,000 students across full, part-time and those that study online. We have a University of Derby online provision, which is specifically students that are just studying online. We have about 6,000 students in our postgraduate taught provision. So those students are mainly doing master's level study, level 7. And then in postgraduate research, we don't have a huge amount of students doing postgraduate research at the University of Derby, but you can see there are 170 full-time postgraduate researchers and 240 part-time researchers undertaking postgraduate degrees, PhDs, and also educational doctorates and professional doctorates. And then we also have a further education part of the university where we've got about 3,000 students that study in our Buxton and Leek College provision. So our students are engaged as well in our research culture, which is one of the pillars of our learning and teaching strategy, which centres around research in the curriculum. And here you can see a snapshot of our strategic framework. Our framework is built on the premise of providing opportunities that can change lives. As I said before, most of our undergraduate students come from state schools and many from disadvantaged areas. And Derby as a city is an opportunity area, which means it's been given additional funding from the government in order to improve its educational and societal issues in order to have positive impact. I won't talk about the whole of our strategic framework, but I will just mention that these 3 pillars in the middle: game changers, positive impact, and opening doors. So pillar 1 is about moulding the next generation of game changers. That's about us having an industry relevant, research informed curriculum. And we really want our students to set high aspirations for themselves, to be creative, to be innovative, and to be able to really stretch their thinking and to be challenged by what university has to offer. In terms of positive impact, we are the only university in our city and in our county, and therefore we take responsibility in how we drive the economic, social, cultural and educational and environmental prosperity of our home. And thirdly, opening doors for everyone. We firmly believe in the transformational nature of education. We are champions of social mobility, and we create opportunities for our students to be successful in their studies and hopefully in their future lives. And we have key strategic priorities, if you go to the next slide, please, John, which are all around ensuring success. So we're continually driving change. We're continually seeking enhancement because we need to ensure that our students make good progress, not just coming into university, but all the way through the student life cycle, at every single touch point, and making sure that our pedagogic practice is as good as it can be, making sure that the students learning and teaching experience is as good as it can be, but also making sure that our students stay with us and make good progress so that they transition into university, through university, and then out of university into employability. So we have that whole focus on the student journey from pre-entry to alumni. But of course, I mentioned before that we have a regulatory landscape that we're working in. And you will have heard of the Office for Students, no doubt, and we have to sign up to the Office for Students under a series of conditions of registration. And what we're going to talk about today really sits with these four key areas that I've put into bold on the right-hand side of the screen. The conditions for registration are a tool that the Office for Students uses as our regulatory body to ensure that we are actually doing what we say we're going to do. And they have great powers on universities. They can impose penalties and financial penalties if we're not acting in the best interests of our students, but also of taxpayers. And of course, regulation and accountability are good because they offer an opportunity to be transparent, but they can also drive behaviours that mean that we're not always doing things for the right purposes. So as you've already heard, at the heart of our approach is the moral and ethical responsibility we have to our students to ensure that they have a really good education with us. So there are tensions between regulation and between accountability and then our institutional autonomy and the purpose of higher education. Some argue that we are losing the ability for students to come to university just for learning's sake, for example. But for me, and for us as a university, one of the things that we welcome about regulation is that it means that all universities are having to act in the best interest of students. Our students pay £9,250 per year for every year that they study with us on their undergraduate degrees. And therefore, it's really important that we make sure that there are quality and reliable standards for all students, that they make good progress, that we have good governance and good leadership, and that we are accountable for those fees that our students are paying. Linked to the regulatory landscape is our Quality Assurance Agency. And the Quality Assurance Agency is the designated quality organisation, and they carry out quality and standards assessments on behalf of the Office for Students. Everything that they do is based around these three principles. So expectations which express the outcomes that all providers should achieve, that set and maintain the standards for the different awards that we provide, but also the practices that we undertake. And there are core practices which just really sit around what all universities have to do, regulatory expectations, if you like, and then common practices which allow us to have that internal review and enhancement within the institution. And also then the Quality Assurance Agency do provide advice and guidance, which helps all providers to be able to maintain effective quality assurance practices. They work on a risk-based assessment. It's data-driven. They see our data. We have to return our data to the different bodies, and they can visit us at 48 hours notice if they're unhappy with what they see in what's returned. So there's an expectation then that we are continually upholding standards and quality. So at the University of Derby, we have recently changed some key approaches to ensure that we can provide the evidence to the Office for Students and to the Quality Assurance Agency, but also be transparent to our students in order to demonstrate the ways in which we're upholding those core and common practices. So we've recently created a quality and standards framework, which includes what we do from a quality assurance perspective, but also what we do from a quality enhancement and a learning enhancement perspective. We've revised the whole of our deliberative structure. So right from what happens within a module that a student is studying, through to the whole of what that course looks like, through to what the school in which the student is studying, their faculty, and then through to the institutional approach, we have a line of sight all the way through from the very small parts of student study, the very specific parts of student study, right the way through to our institutional academic board, which makes our key decisions. So there's governance right across the entire student learning journey. So everything is based around quality assurance and learning enhancement, and all of our agendas and all of our discussions through our quality processes and through our deliberative structures have those two key parts as a key focus. Our staff are expected to complete self-evaluation documents which demonstrate how they are doing their continual monitoring, so that through the year they are making in-year changes where need be, based on the different elements of student feedback that they might be receiving. And that takes me to the third part of our regulatory landscape. So John, if you wouldn't mind with the next slide. And that's our students. So we're highly accountable to our students. We're accountable to our students through the different feedback mechanisms that happen. And some of these are national and some of these are internal. So there's the National Student Survey, and there's the Postgraduate Taught Survey. So the National Student Survey is for our undergraduate students, and the Postgraduate Taught Survey is for those studying at master's level. The Postgraduate Research Survey for those studying doctorates. We also have our own internal University of Derby survey, which links to the National Student Survey. And we ask our students to complete module evaluation questionnaires mid-module and at the end of a module, so that we can understand what their experience has looked like when they're doing their specific learning. Those different surveys allow us to benchmark our provision with others in the sector at a discipline, but also at an institutional level. It helps us to gather feedback, and it helps us to understand where improvements need to be made. But I think as well, what's important is that our students are helping to inform our practice. So we engage students as partners. They have a student charter that they write with us. That student charter talks about what's our institutional responsibility, and then what's the responsibility of students in our university. Our deliberative structures, as I talked about before, our students co-chair our committees all the way through. So we have students that co-chair our academic development and quality committee. We have students who co-chair our learning and teaching committee, and our students co-chair the Student Affairs Committee with members from our governing council. We have a number of student voice forums where students talk about their experience with senior members of staff in their faculties. And we have student representatives that sit within those that provide us with additional feedback, but also provide feedback to the students on what the university is doing. Our students are involved in the recruitment of staff. So when we bring new members of staff to the university, they're part of the interview process and part of the decision-making process. And they're involved in major projects. They're involved in the way that we design and implement our policy. And they help us to understand what our virtual learning environment looks like, so that we get that right, because that's a key part of our student learning. So you can see that our students really inform what we do on a day-to-day basis. And over to the holistic student journey. What's I think really interesting is we can talk about student experience, but actually the research says there isn't one student experience, because every single student comes to university from a different place, from a different background, with a different experience of schooling, with different examinations that they've done, and with a different set of aspirations. So when they come to university, it's our job, it's our responsibility to consider the whole of the student experience all the way through in its entirety, including not just the programme that the student is coming to study, but also the extracurricular and the co-curricular opportunities that are available to students that help to transform their lives. So for example, we give our students the opportunity for international travel. We give our students the opportunity to set up their own businesses. We give our students the opportunity to be part of the ways in which we deliberate within the university. And our own research, we did a big piece of research in 2016, and that really demonstrated the significance that students placed on the intellectual stimulation that they get from being in higher education, and what studying at a higher level than they did at school brings to them. And they're particularly interested in their career aspirations and the intellectual challenge that that brings. And so we're very clear. Our mission is not to position our students as consumers of education, which the regulatory and the accountability approach can often bring. But actually our students are partners in our academic endeavour. They're part of our research journey. They're part of our research culture. They're part of how we do learning and teaching. And that's really important in terms of our philosophy as a university. And so just before I hand over to John, the student journey then, and I use this roadmap picture on purpose because every single touch point is critical to a successful student journey. Every transition, coming into university, how our students transition from semester to semester, from level to level, how we work with our personal academic tutors to support students on a personal level, how we give them the academic rigor and challenge that they want, and how we help them to be successful. And we know from the research, we take a very evidence-based approach to what we do. And we know from the research that that students place a high value on consistency and on coherence. So the way that we create our programs, the way that we design our curricula, and the way that we deliver our practice has to form part of the whole student journey. So it's important that it's coherent, and it's important that it's consistent. And that's why the Student Success Framework project that we did with Advance HE was particularly useful to us, because it provided us with that opportunity to take an evidence-based approach to developing that coherent curriculum design and practice, and to make sure that our students are involved in how we plan and develop all our student relevant initiatives to ensure engagement, to ensure a good student experience and a cohesive journey from the day that they arrive through to them being our alumni. And I'm going to hand over to John, who's now going to talk through that very specific project that we've been doing with Advance HE. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Fiona. Hello, everybody. I'm John Hill, and at the University of Derby, I lead the library services and digital learning services. So just on that digital learning, that includes staff training, support, delivery of educational technology platforms. And of most relevance to this talk is that I had responsibility in the last 2 years for also managing the Student Success Framework project. So picking up the view from Fiona, in consideration of the aims of the project, Fiona has stated that we have a range of regulatory requirements. There's also the institutional ambition to better support student success as a university and address key questions. How do we shape practice across the institution? How do we assure the quality of practice? So looking at the core aims of the project, we want student success at the core of our approach, a consistent organisational wide approach to develop a more consistent and integrated approach to curriculum design, and inform the core principles that form a future learning and teaching strategy as we rework that for future practice. We felt the Success Framework series would help inform planning, review, validation, accreditation, and programme approval processes, and ultimately enhance the quality of students' learning experience throughout the academic life cycle and that student journey that Fiona has just talked us through. And therefore, there is the question of why the Advanced HE Students of Success Framework series was selected to deliver those aims. Firstly, Advanced HE is a respected United Kingdom organisation with sector expertise from practitioners across the sector. That includes Ben, who's chairing today. So it is that opportunity to tap into that broader expertise using our internal expertise, but that broader expertise from across the sector. So therefore, the framework provides a research-informed evidence base for future-focused and teaching and curriculum development. It has that sector credibility based on that level of expertise. So going forward in the presentation, I'll speak to each of the frameworks, but just to quickly run through, the series combines 6 frameworks: employability, access, retention, progression and attainment, student engagement, internationalisation, flexible learning and assessment. So I will cover each of those. What we have seen in the UK sector, some higher education institutions have adopted one of the frameworks as an area to target their focus. But at Derby, we recognised we must take a holistic approach and look at all the 6 frameworks together. And on that basis, we became the first institution to work with Advanced HE to embed all 6 frameworks across a holistic project. So to introduce each of the frameworks, the first framework, student access, retention, attainment and progression in HE. This supports the approach to widening participation in higher education, social mobility, students from all backgrounds, and adoption of the framework informs strategic conversations and ensuring it is part of the curriculum design consideration. It is part of also shaping a continuing professional development offer for our academic staff. For example, ensuring the accessibility for disabled students is part of that training offer. And from a Derby perspective, we firmly believe that higher education should be open to everyone who has the ambition and desire to learn and progress. And that is core, as Fiona has talked through, as part of our strategic framework. We do have a public-facing access and participation plan that is a condition of registration with the Office for Students, the regulator, and we report on the progress we have made against our targets, making sure that we honour the commitments that we have made to our students, and there's an annual monitoring process of those commitments. So we take a whole institutional approach to ensure equality of opportunity for all students. The next framework, Internationalising HE, targets that we ensure our curriculum reflects a global position. So we understand the diversity of all our students and that we transcend national and international boundaries. And with all the frameworks, it's important that these themes become part of our collective institutional narrative, so that we are embedding these approaches in our teaching, designing the curriculum, when we introduce and when we shape strategy. So from a Derby perspective, we have students from all over the world, including students joining us on campus through our collaborative partnership provision and through our dedicated online distance learning provision. And it's our ambition to make sure that we support students through our international strategy. And one particular theme I'll note is the importance of establishing a sense of belonging for all our students and connecting for all our students to the curriculum. to reflect global perspectives in the curriculum and ultimately allow students to see themselves in the curriculum and make those connections. Sorry, just move the slides. So on the flexible learning framework, this is the principle of extending the classroom, supporting learning through flexible approaches. So the importance of technology and digital learning to support the delivery of the curriculum, learning spaces that enable active learning, and a campus that supports social learning. So very much the concept of learning beyond the classroom, so bringing in technology such as lecture recording, those digital resources such as library resources, effective use of the the learning management system, the virtual learning environment, to deliver in that learning online space. And training staff to ensure that they're capable to deliver that flexible learning. Also to note is all assessment is through online submission and online feedback, and pushing the importance of digital formative assessment. So from a Derby perspective, as I've noted, the University of Derby online learning is our provision to support online distance learning, and we have up to 4,000 students studying in that mode. We have a dedicated technology enhanced learning strategy, move forward with digital initiatives. I'll talk more about our current approach to blended learning due to the pandemic. But we also have projects engaging with employers to explore the digital capabilities that are required for the workforce, and making sure that we aid employers in the digital capabilities that they have in the workplace, as well as what appears in the curriculum. And we also have projects shaping our learning spaces that best support study, making sure it's collaborative and that we move away from some of those didactic forms of delivery. The next framework is the student engagement through partnership framework, which is key theme running throughout all the different frameworks, that we engage students through partnership, increase the opportunities for students to engage with academics and shape the curriculum. We see students as co-researchers, students involved in course design and validation processes, students having scholarship opportunities, and a range of extracurricular opportunities that surround the curriculum. So again, from a Derby perspective, we have a dedicated university research scholarship scheme that funds student research opportunities to actively put funding in place for students. We have a student employment agency that creates opportunities for students to work in the university to get those experiences of the workplace. So for example, there'll be student placements in departments, students working in the library. We have students as digital media producers, so they're creating video content for the university. As noted by Fiona, we have students co-chairing committees, that's senior staff and students co-chairing in that space, to make sure the agendas speak to the student need and we hear the student voice. There have been many co-creation projects, such as students helping to design and refurbish learning spaces. We also have students on recruitment panels. In terms of the transforming assessment framework, that framework is looking to ensure assessment supports the learning process, is fit for purpose, that there is assessment literacy within course design, and with that need to increase consistency of practice and reliability across programs. And from a Derby perspective, academic integrity is core to our approach around those practices to make sure that we are open, honest, relevant, and meaningful in our academic delivery. That assessment is inclusive and authentic, that we offer those opportunities for innovation, it's professionally applied, so very much making sure that we are speaking to the employability agenda, but there is co-production, flexibility and choice, and there is that dialogue between our students and staff to assure that integrity and value of feedback. So making sure that it is engaging, dialogic feedback, and there is those feed-forward opportunities. Assessment and feedback is a key strategic priority for the university in terms of development of practice for the benefit of the whole academic community. And the final framework is embedding employability in higher education. So making sure again that we're adopting a systematic approach to embed in learning and teaching those opportunities, engaging all the stakeholders, and really ensuring responsibility is recognised by all the stakeholders, and making sure it doesn't feel that employability happens in one area of the institution or one department has responsibility. It's a collective effort across all stakeholders. And from a Derby perspective, employability, activity, learning are embedded within the curriculum. We have a guarantee of 30 hours work experience within the curriculum for students, including the opportunity for life schemes such as Futures Awards, Be the Boss schemes that are built around having more opportunity to get those experiences that will help them for future employment. And employability forms one of the 3 pillars of the university's existing learning and teaching strategy. And we make sure that employers inform the curriculum, that they are at the heart of that curriculum design to prepare students for their chosen career, and making sure that there is that successful engagement in learning which is relevant and meaningful for employers. So we engage with employers through a range of different schemes. There are internship opportunities, work-based learning, and placements that is core to the university offer. In terms of a few words of how we took forward a pilot project forward at the University of Derby, we engaged with 15 programme courses that joined an intensive project. We had 6 full-day workshops with guest experts speaking to each of the frameworks. So it was a large-scale continuing professional development opportunity, and also something that could inform a scheme that is run by Advanced HE, Sector Fellowship and Senior Fellowship to get recognition for staff that they are able to speak to these agendas as part of their development as academics. As part of the project, we introduced a review tool as a mechanism to analyse programmes and the curriculum. And even with this pilot project, there were over 2,000 pieces of individual data that were informing the process that the programmes were working through. So an intensive piece of work. And Fiona did mention early on that one of the measures that we have in the UK is the National Student Survey. So this was a key metric that was looked at in terms of how can we support colleagues to improve performance in that space. And we did see programmes record an average overall satisfaction of 92%, which was an average increase for those programmes from the previous year. The project also evidenced our ongoing commitment to our Office for Student Conditions of Registration that Fiona displayed at the start. But it's really ensuring and showing how we are making sure we have well-designed courses that provide a high-quality academic experience for all students. And that's a key term that we continuously use. It is for all students that we look to ensure the provision for. So the pandemic has diverted the project from its original path, and Fiona will say a few words shortly on that in terms of next steps. But what the frameworks have informed is the development of a blended applied learning model that we have deployed for the unique 2020-21 academic year. And displaying on the screen now is that blended applied learning model. And what we have needed to do during this period is turn the dial more towards flexible learning. In the UK, a large percentage of our learning has needed to be delivered online, with a smaller percentage on campus to apply with social distancing requirements. And that's led us to embed this new blended applied learning model, very much informed by the student success frameworks. And the framework series allowed us to, at pace, put in place the model and maintain that excellent standard in academic experience. So as noted, the dial for flexible learning was increased, and we had a large-scale continuing professional development program for all staff to increase their digital learning capability in further teaching in the online space. So that was a facilitated online training course across the summer to give academics the experience of being a student in an online space and understanding just before delivering that teaching what that experience feels like. Also, another key dial that was turned for one of the frameworks was the student as partners opportunity, and the model has been co-delivered with students throughout this period, and students have formed part of an academic task group to deliver the blended applied learning model alongside senior staff that has really guided it through this most challenging of academic years. We've also ensured that we've maintained our connections to employers and made sure that we maintain those student opportunities for the workplace. So that is a run through of the frameworks, how we've deployed them, and how it has aided us in the delivery for this unique year that we're all at the moment experiencing and continuing to work through the challenges and opportunities that it's presented us. But I will now pass back to Fiona to conclude the presentation.
Thanks, John. So just to conclude, really, the next steps for us at the University of Derby sit around the fact that I suppose the nature and actually the strength of higher education is the fact that our institutions are absolutely bursting to the seams with staff who've got diverse and really interesting elements of expertise and research expertise. So everybody has a slightly different approach and everybody has a slightly different opinion on what you should do and how you should do it. But actually, in order to maintain and assure consistency, and in order to be clear about what you're evaluating, it's become very clear to us that having a more coherent and consistent approach to programme design, to curriculum design, and to the way in which we teach our students is really important. And that doesn't mean that we expect everybody to do things in exactly the same way, but it means that we need a coherent and consistent approach to how we ask staff to think about and to talk about learning, teaching and assessment in their programmes. So you can see here we're looking to develop our own curriculum design model that's based on the work that we've done with Advance HE that speaks to our institution. We're looking at those, and that will include those coherent and consistent approaches to programme design. Our new learning and teaching strategy will also consider the innovative ways that we can be working with students to improve the ways in which we teach our students and our pedagogic delivery. That we always maintain a focus on assessment and feedback because it's a key part of the student experience, but also how we develop and maintain some of the blended approaches that we've been taken during this pandemic. And then we have an ambition for employability in the curriculum. You heard before that we have 30 hours guaranteed work experience for all students in the curriculum, but we want to increase that, we want to enhance that so that employers are part and parcel of how we deliver pedagogic practice to students, so that employability becomes embedded, as does the student voice, throughout the whole of the student journey. And all of that becomes wrapped up in the way that we induct our staff to the university. So we've got a new staff induction programme that we're developing, the ways in which we create our academic practice programme to support staff in training and in developments that they need to make, and how we share the very best practice and innovative practice that we see across our institution to make sure that our own staff are talking about what they've been doing and how it's having an impact in order to make sure that our students have an excellent learning journey. So hopefully, to summarise, we've provided you with the ways in which we've been doing things at the University of Derby, how we're approaching student experience, taking into consideration and balancing the regulatory landscape, but also thinking about the ways in which our students really do operate as partners. That big project that we've been doing around the Student Success Frameworks piece, and then how that has helped us to understand what we do from a blended applied learning model in order to respond to the pandemic. And then our next steps, as I've just explained, that's the hard bit now. We've got these big pieces of work that we need to take forward and embed and get whole institutional buy-in to make sure that all our staff and students are engaged with the new approaches that we would like to take. So that's it from us. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, I think it's over to Ben, who will help to facilitate those questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, John, for that excellent presentation. It was a wonderful overview of your holistic approach to design and also how you've used the Student Success Framework. Before we go to questions, I believe the Minister for Higher Education has joined us. And so I think we're going to go to a few words from the Minister first.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, just to say again that we run this higher education program in Uzbekistan in close partnership with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education, and we get full support of our program here in Uzbekistan to support close collaboration between education institutions in Uzbekistan and in the UK. And today we have got Head of Innovation and Research Division from the Ministry, Adham Khudaykulov, who is joining us today just to say a few words about the Ministry's perspective on enhancing students' experience. And I'm delighted to say that Adham himself has got experience of studying in the UK. So over to you, Adham. Can you say a few words on behalf of the Ministry?
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hello, everyone. And thank you very much. Massive thank you for nice presentations, dear friends in UK. Mr. Braben and Mrs. Shelton and Mr. Hill. And thank you very much again. Let me speak in Uzbek, please, at this time. Assalomu alaykum, hurmatli xonimlar va janoblar. Bugungi kunda Oliy va o'rta maxsus ta'lim vazirligi Buyuk Britaniya kengashi bilan hamkorlikda istiqbolli loyihalarni amalga oshirib kelmoqda. Bularning barchasi milliy oliy tizimni sifat jihatdan yangi bosqichga ko'tarishga qaratilgan loyihalar hisoblanadi. Bugungi seminar mavzusi ham ushbu keng ko'lamli hamkorlikning bir mahsuli sifatida talqin qilish mumkin va bu mavzu juda ham muhim hisoblanadi hozirgi rivojlanish bosqichida. Biz bu hamkorlikni albatta qo'llab-quvvatlaymiz va buning uchun minnatdorchilik bildiramiz. Mana bugungi seminar mavzusi talabalarning zarur ko'nikmalarini rivojlantirishning sifatini oshirish. Bu oliy ta'lim tizimida juda muhim ahamiyatga ega. Shu nuqtai nazardan ham Buyuk Britaniyaning bir qator yetakchi mutaxassislari bugun taklif etilgan va buning uchun albatta Britaniya kengashi, O'zbekistonning Buyuk Britaniyadagi elchixonasiga tashakkur bildiramiz va mutaxassislarning bildiradigan fikrlari, umuman ko'taradigan masalalari biz uchun ham O'zbekistondagi hozirgi rivojlanayotgan oliy ta'lim tizimi uchun ham juda ham o'rinli va muhim takliflar va fikrlar hisoblanadi. Buning uchun albatta rahmat aytamiz. Hurmatli janob Braven, vazirlik sizni va Advanced Higher Education bilan hamkorlikdagi oliy ta'lim sohada ko'p yillik samarali faoliyatingizni qadrlaydi. Shelton xonim, sizning ham ko'p yillik amaliy tajribangiz respublikamizda oliy ta'lim tizimi faoliyatini takomillashtirishda juda zarur deb hisoblaymiz. Janob Hill, sizning ham raqamli ta'lim va kutubxona xizmatlaridagi tajribangiz va hamkorlik aloqalarida qo'shayotgan hissangiz uchun alohida minnatdorchilik bildiramiz va o'ylaymanki bugungi tadbirdan, bugungi seminardan hamma respublikada hozir qatnashayotganlar, barcha oliy ta'lim muassasalarining mas'ul xodimlari, o'qituvchilar, professorlar hammasi bundan bir yaxshi xulosalar chiqaradi va yaxshi ma'lumotlarga ega bo'ladi va kelajakda bu amaliyotda qo'llash uchun asqotadi deb o'ylaymiz. Rahmat.
Thank you very much, Adham. And over to you, Ben, to deal with any further questions and comments.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I'm going to turn to questions that have already been posted in the chat box first, and then I have a few questions to draw Fiona and John out a little bit further on some of the things you introduced and discussed. But the first question that is something we've all been living with. And the question is, how have student behaviors changed as a result of COVID-19?
Shall I start and then hand over to you, John? It's a fantastic question, actually. I think what we've noted is that we have a real dichotomy. So there are some students who are desperate to be on campus, in the classroom with their teachers. And then there are some students who have really enjoyed the opportunity to be at home to access their learning in the digital environment, and the same of our staff as well. I think the way it's changed behaviours is that in some aspects we've seen less engagement with students sometimes, and in other aspects we've seen greater engagement. So we've been running what we call our peer-assisted learning scheme, which is a peer-to-peer support scheme for students to help each other. And we've seen that grow. That's grown exponentially in terms of students wanting to help each other out. And it's a very well-designed scheme and very specific. We've also seen greater engagement in some of the extra and co-curricular activity that we've offered students that they perhaps wouldn't have come to the university to do because it would have been outside of their study hours, but they've been able to engage because it's been digital. So they have actually engaged in some of those sessions. So that's seen a change in behaviour. I think from a challenging perspective, one of the things that we've noted are the actual challenges that our students have faced that we perhaps didn't know about. So I talked about at the beginning that we have lots of students from disadvantaged backgrounds at the University of Derby. And most of those students we know have got equipment that they can use. So they've got computers, they've got laptops and things. However, they tend to be the family laptop or the family computer. And then as soon as we were thrown into the pandemic, when they were at home and their partners were using the computer and their children were using the computer, we recognised that there was a real inequity for some of our students, and particularly those mature students with families. That's been very challenging. But also for some students who can't afford the equipment that they need. And I'm sure John will talk about the digital equity project that we've had running, which has helped that. But I think from a behaviours perspective, the other thing that we've noted is that there's a huge appetite with students for the social context that learning brings. And the digital space is more challenging in some respects for some of that social aspect. So they've asked for greater opportunities to be with each other. They've asked for greater opportunities to be able to form those academic learning communities. And I think that's where we've seen also a change in behaviour, that students are really striving and requesting those social opportunities. I think it's worth John saying a few words about the digital equity scheme that we've run, because that's, I think, part of the changing behaviours that we've noted in our students as well.
Yes, thank you, Fiona. Just a few words in terms of the context. So for myself, who's been working in digital learning for 2 decades, trying to push the importance of provision in that space, the pandemic has obviously been a huge monumental shift and an opportunity to deliver in that space. And we've seen a range of behaviours. Fiona's talked through quite a few there, but it has given us that opportunity to see where it works for students. Sessions such as personal academic tutoring we've delivered in the online space, and students have really responded well to that offer, and that isn't something we'd expect to go back to an in-person delivery space. So it's opportunities such as having a lived experience that has really given the opportunity to say what works for students and what doesn't. I think that's going to be a long journey as we try and grab hold of the benefits from this period. Probably the obvious statement is grabbing hold of the areas that have worked successfully and refining and removing some of those things that we've put in place as an emergency that haven't worked so well, and making sure that we continue that staff capability. We have been surveying students throughout this period using pulse surveys, using digital insights surveys to understand these student behaviours and what they've been expecting, the difficulties that they've been facing. But as Fiona has mentioned, the digital equity issue has really come through strongly in those student feedback surveys, realising the challenging position that some students have been faced with when they haven't been able to access the campus as freely as previously. So the library has traditionally been that space where students could access study space, computers, stable Wi-Fi. Many students for periods of time have lost access to that. So the scheme that Fiona has referenced is that early on, as an emergency response, we did put in place a scheme so students could be borrowing on a long-term basis laptops, PCs that they could take home and make sure that they could still engage with the learning process. So that was a huge endeavour. It's not as simple as just the hardware. We had to provide data as well for those students who were challenged from a digital poverty perspective. So that's been an important scheme and a lot of investment in that space. But it's by having that strong student partnership, that engagement, that we'd have the student voice, that it told us early on that we needed to put those things in place, and we made quick investment into additional laptops, which became increasingly difficult as the world started to buy up stock of available laptops so that we could take early action in that space.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Fiona. There are more questions coming in. I think I'm going to go to the next question that's been translated very kindly in the chat box. And then I believe there's another colleague who might want to ask a question and unmute. So I'll go to that first question in continuation of this theme around digital and digital formats. So do you think digital formats will eventually change the students' attitude towards, well, it's their environment, the life around them? And are you seeing any evidence of that? I think it's a very topical debate, looking at images in the UK coming out of lockdown, with people sort of out in nature, re-embracing I suppose, natural world, but actually more broadly, will that change mindsets? Have you seen that in practice? You mentioned earlier around, actually it's enhanced some things, it's given students actually opportunities in unexpected areas, but perhaps you could say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start and then pass across to Fiona. I think there's quite a lot that we could be saying in this space, so we're both keen to talk on this one. As I was just speaking, I think, yes, Ben, there were some of those elements that we've seen students respond to particularly well, such as the example with the personal academic tutoring. We've also seen some of those extracurricular schemes that we've put on that students have really engaged with, and the numbers have tripled, quadrupled in terms of the students taking advantage of those offers as they've moved to the virtual digital space. We've also put a virtual induction in place, and that was very, very well received by students. But again, as Fiona said at the start of her previous answer, that there is that split. It's not a simple, we're heading in this direction. There are different views. And I think, Ben, in what you mentioned there about that engagement with the physical, the real world environment, there is obviously a reignited passion and value of those spaces. And in the feedback coming from students, that real value of having that in-person contact, that socialization, that has come through strongly. So I think it is, speaking again to the previous answer, a little bit around taking the best of these modes. There is an appetite to continue in the digital space, but not at the expense of the in-person space. So it's going to be having that conversation, getting that balance right. There is some fear, I think, from students that, you know, is there a long-term shift to delivering more in digital? And that's where we need to educate and say, no, it is. And the term of the course that we put our staff through as part of that continuing professional development was called the best of blends, the best of blended learning. That's what we need to offer students to make sure the face-to-face is so valuable. There's a reason to come in. It is that active applied learning. There is that reason to make those connections. And then the digital that's around that. And as I mentioned earlier in the slides, it's about breaking down those boundaries of the classroom. So it really is that we can extend learning wherever possible. But I'll hand across to Fiona.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, thanks, John. I suppose one of the things that we've been also doing is saying, well, you know, the digital experience for students isn't just about what happens in the learning spaces, it's also about the services that we've offered. So John talked about the library. All of our services have shifted to being digital, and we see greater uptake in some of those services than we had previously. And that's an interesting phenomenon for us. But I think from a learning and teaching perspective, what I'm really interested in as exploring further is on the blended applied learning model that we've produced, one of those sections is called Learning Labs. And they're the on-campus part of the student learning. And at the moment, our students can be on campus for no more than about 3 hours. And that's because of the limitations to the space that we have, our capacity to have students on site and to still manage COVID restrictions. But actually, those student learning labs need to be different to what students have experienced in the past because of so much of their learning being in the digital space. So what I can see happening in the future is that we maintain these approaches that we call these learning labs. It's just a name that we've given to the classroom space, but to try to shift staff to understand that what students need is a much more intense and applied and active approach to learning when they're on campus, so that the learning, you know, taking that flipped learning approach, if you like, so that a lot of the big ideas can be shared through a digital approach in the blended learning. But then when they come onto the campus, they're doing the active learning. And I see in the future more social learning spaces for students. I see in the future more opportunities for students to be transdisciplinary in their learning, because what the pandemic has shown us is that digital can actually cross all spaces. And I can see a real opportunity for transdisciplinary learning where students aren't confined to their own subject area, but can also pick up learning from other areas, which they do a little bit of now anyway. But I think the digital space can help with that. But for me, that intense experience on campus is where we're changing what learning and teaching looks like. And I think all over the world, higher education probably doesn't look very different. If you're in a lab, you're doing very similar things. If you're in a lecture theatre, you're doing very different things. And we're saying we probably need to move away from lecture theatre approaches to learning and teaching and have more of this applied and active and discursive approach to learning and teaching when students are with us in their campus spaces. And I think there's something quite exciting about exploring that.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, John. We're now going back to our colleague at the Ministry. It's Adam, and I think he's unmuted. He's going to ask a question to you.
Yes, thank you very much. All the formalities aside, I'm just going to thank both of the speakers for their very insightful and informative information and presentation. It's really, really nice. So my question is basically related to the more institutional aspect of student experience and then improving that experience in general. So you have, Fiona, you have mentioned and nicely elaborated on the institutional as well as the legal framework, regulatory framework of the quality assurance. But we have always a puzzle here. I think it's not peculiar to Uzbekistan. I think it applies to all countries around the world. The designing the regulatory framework is one thing, but the implementation is totally separate, and you have to apply certain tools and techniques to effectively implement those regulatory aspects. So what do you do, and do you have any peculiar experience of making implementation process effectively? What could you elaborate on this? How do you ever face with issues in implementing those regulated frameworks? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, we do. It's a challenge. Anything that you implement is a challenge, particularly in somewhere like a university, because they're so big. And because, as I said before, we have staff who've got very different ideas about the way that things should happen. So from an implementation perspective, I mean, what we've done with our quality assurance and learning enhancement framework is to look at what does the QAA require. And we've created a framework that's an outline of the key elements of the regulatory requirements, and then how does that translate to our institutional approach. So, and we've taken that through our deliberative structures so that everybody in the senior positions that sit on those key committees then knows what does that framework look like, what does that mean for us as a university, and how does that then filter down to the different deliberative structures through the whole of the university. So, for example, we have the Learning and Teaching Committee, and we have the Academic Development and Quality Committee. The Academic Development and Quality Committee is concerned with compliance and assurance to the quality framework. And the Learning and Teaching Committee is concerned with the pedagogic aspects of that, our learning enhancement approaches, how we make things better for students, and how we enact change. So the two have quite separate responsibilities and requirements. Then, if you come into what happens within a faculty, there's a faculty committee, and beneath that, there are then programme committees, and they all have a similar agenda, which each have a compliance, so the assurance side, and they each have an enhancement. We call it Part A, is compliance and enhancement, and part B, is compliance and assurance, and part B is enhancement. And those committees within the faculties feed into the institutional committee, and that's how we've been operationalizing it. And then alongside that, we've been working with the different administrative staff, can't say the word, administrative staff in the university who help to officer the different committees. And we've worked with the chairs, and we've worked with the key members of those committees to explain those agendas and how they work in terms of the whole of the deliberative structure. And within all of that, there's a spine of student voice that also feeds in all the way through. So the student voice is always responded to, always heard, and always acted on. But we've done it through training, we've done it through discussion, we've done it through consultation. And then I suppose the other key element of that is what we call our continual monitoring. And so if you are an academic member of staff and you teach a module, you have to do what we call the module evaluation document. That feeds into the programme evaluation document. All of those feed into the college evaluation document, which then goes up to the university level committees. So there's a line of sight all the way through the institution. And we didn't have that before. This is new. This is so that we can be audit ready. It's so we can have an evidence trail, and it's so that we can demonstrate to our students, but also to the Office for Students and to the Quality Assurance Agency that here are our minutes, here are the ways that we've done these things, and here's the evidence of it. So there's a trail all the way through the whole of the institution. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Very clear and sounds like, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you. Can I just add to that before we go to a question? I believe a colleague has a hand raised. Just obviously from my experience of Derby, having worked with you, I think one thing that I certainly saw is those processes and structures are not just there for ticking the box of quality. They are meaningful. And I think that's so important. You have that sense of buy-in, and it's a journey of enhancement that's behind that, very much obviously focused on the student experience. I think there's always a danger with any regulatory process that they become complicated and they just become then about form filling and ticking boxes. I think we've got to really sort of highlight from your experience, Fiona, from your experience, John, that it's meaningful in practice. Yeah, and your students are involved in that. Your students recognize that as well, and colleagues recognize that. They're not just doing it to tick a box. I just wanted to make that observation.
Can I give an example of that? So we recently we created a new policy, which is that we now mark all our students' work anonymously. We used to many years ago, and then we moved away from that practice. And our students said, we want anonymous marking. We want you to mark our work without knowing who it is, because we want to take risks in our work. We want to express ourselves in a way that we perhaps wouldn't if we knew that you knew who we were when you marked it. Our students drove the whole of that policy. They consulted with students, they consulted with staff, they were part of the development of the policy as it was written. They took it with me, we worked on it together, and we took it to academic board. We had it at academic board approved, and then they've also been part of evaluating it and seeing how it's working in its implementation in the university. And so that's how our students are literally taking agendas and helping us to improve their experience through the institution. And that's just one very specific example of how we've been able to do that.
Thank you, Fiona. Our colleague's been waiting patiently, and I apologise for taking so long to get to you, but we have a hand raised from Masum. So if you wouldn't mind unmuting if you'd like to and sharing your question.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for organizers, especially for the British Council of Uzbekistan and other British partners. And I'm working in an IT park in Surkhandarya region, recently we started to open the incubation centers at the University of Uzbekistan. And this is actually very important today. Thanks to bilateral efforts of IT Park and university, students have the opportunity to have incubation centers nearby in which they can not only implement their ideas and projects or seek support from mentors and specialists, but also be in the startup ecosystem itself, feeling the entire entrepreneurial atmosphere to the fullest and the support that is given from both IT Park and universities. And my question is, can British universities share the experience and support, or can we make some bilateral partnership projects together with the British universities and our universities in this area? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Fiona, do you want to come in? Or sorry.
Yeah, so thank you for your question, and that sounds fantastic. And you know, we're doing similar things to what you've just explained, and it's really important for students to have those experiences to build the behaviours that you need for business, but also to build the understanding that they need. The bilateral agreements sit outside of my remit, but I will speak to our international colleagues and let them know that there's been a request, and maybe the British Council can help us with how we might take that forward. I can't promise anything because it's not my job. So, but
thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll follow up on that. Colleagues, I am mindful of time, but we have a few more questions, and I don't necessarily want to take them out of order, but I believe I'm just looking at my direct messages and the messages for everyone. So if you wouldn't mind, we'll go to the rector first, and I'm just seeing who that is. I've been direct messaged from the British Council on that, from Jamila.
It's Ulbek Kasim Hajaev, rector of the university, under the Ministry of Public Education.
Would you like to either share the question or to unmute and pose the question, please?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, yes. First of all, I would like to thank you for a very informative and very interesting presentation. I myself was able to gain lots of insight from one of the leading universities in the world. I have two questions. You kind of touched upon it, but again, you know, given the nature of pandemic, a lot of students are not happy with online teaching. At the end of the day, having an experience, having a being in a auditorium as well as talking to their peers is completely different than sitting online and looking at a screen. So how would you kind of bring it closer, the experience, to the real world? What kind of tools are you using, number one? Number two, can you share that experience? Did you have a research? I believe one of the speakers were telling that they're working constantly on improving their way of deliverance of the quality of education. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to start the answer to that. I'm sure Fiona will want to come in. So it does relate to some of the things we've touched upon. I can talk a little bit about the technology, but I think the main principle is around the pedagogic delivery. So that is where we've been the best of blends training course for our academic colleagues. So I think in that first emergency period that landed just over a year ago, it was a sudden shift, and it was very basic in terms of deliver through a Zoom space, a Teams space, such as that we're working through now. And some of those pedagogic principles of how to conduct the sessions, how to facilitate, haven't all been translated across. So that's why we spent a lot of energy during the summer and throughout this academic year supporting our colleagues. So that ability to replicate some of the best practices in active learning that would happen in an in-person delivery, using breakout groups in the technology so students can have that group collaboration, make sure that they're making those connections, making sure that they're forming that knowledge in the small groups and then coming back into the broader sessions. It's those type of techniques that we've been encouraging in the virtual learning environment, those discussion forums. So basic technology, it's the way that they're being used to make sure that there's that facilitation, that students can feel that the tutor is there, facilitating discussions, making those connections across. It has been a real area of capability requirement in terms of online socialization. But clearly, students have still reported that they're missing out on those opportunities, that ability to socialise, that learning that forms as students walk away from the lecture theatre or the classrooms and they convene in social study spaces. We've spent a lot of effort, resource in previous years, kind of building a campus to support that natural flow of the learning to come out of the formal teaching spaces into the informal. And we recognise the importance of that, but using the technology to support more collaboration, more connections, more online socialisation has been an area to drive. It's really been happening though through the standard technologies such as the virtual learning environment. Microsoft Teams is more akin to a social media type platform that enables more of those connections. And obviously we use Microsoft Teams, Blackboard Collaborate for the online delivery, which does afford those breakout rooms where students can make those connections. So I'd probably hand over to Fiona at this point if Fiona wants to say anything more on the subject.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think you make a really good point that students are saying that they're not happy with, and they don't particularly like having everything delivered in the online space. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that because we are in a pandemic and we just have to deliver as best we possibly can. And we have to say that to students and we have to set those expectations out that if you could all come on campus, we'd have you, but we can't. So what we've been trying to do is to set expectations really clearly so that our students know that as soon as they can, we will bring them back. There are some specialist learning spaces they can come to because they have to progress in their studies and they have learning outcomes. They have learning outcomes to meet. And so what we have been able to do is open up some spaces for students to come to be able to do work. The other thing that we have done is to set a series of baselines which help us with those expectations. So John's team have created digital baselines that every member of staff is expected to follow, which gives them a more coherent approach. We're setting a set of baselines for personal academic tutors so that they know exactly what it is that they're expected to do on a day-to-day basis. And we've also set a series of baselines which just set out the basic expectations for staff in what that on-campus space looks like for when students are able to be on campus. And some of our students now are on campus. But I really take your point that it's a very challenging situation. But we can't have all the students back as we would have done. Being COVID compliant doesn't allow us to. However, I think letting students know that and being really open and honest and setting the expectations for them helps them to understand that this isn't us doing this to them. This is a global pandemic. I mean, look at all us now. It would be great if we could come and visit you in Uzbekistan, but we can't. But you know, these opportunities are created to make good of a global pandemic and a world health situation that we can't do anything else about. So I think setting really clear expectations for students and really clear expectations for staff is an important part of that.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, John. I am mindful that we are starting to run out of time. And what I would say is I think we're more than happy to sort of follow up some of these threads after this session, either obviously via Advance HE or the British Council or a combination of the two of us working together and explore some of these issues and questions and challenges in more detail after the session, and perhaps share links and contacts. But I now have to hand back to Jamila to bring things to a close. Thank you again, colleagues, for your time. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Ben. On behalf of the British Council, let me thank Advance HE and the University of Derby for sharing your experience, to thank the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education and all universities in Uzbekistan for very, very active participation in this discussion. I think what we are discussing now is central to all reforms that are taking place here in Uzbekistan, in higher education, in public education, because as I said in the beginning, students are at the heart of everything that we do in education. So really, really important discussions, and I know no webinar can solve any problems within 1 hour and a half, but this is a beginning of some discussions and conversations. And I have got some direct requests from people to get from the University of Derby, Student Success Framework, new curriculum review tool, digital equity policy document. All these are really, really important. And just to say to all Uzbekistan participants that we have translated all the slides from our previous discussion around higher education governance with Advance HE. We will be doing translation of slides of today's discussion and putting them on our website. We will also put the recording of this webinar and previous webinar on the website and share with anyone who wants to refer to it. So our next webinar will take place in the end of April. And on request from the ministry, from all universities, we will be focusing on credit transfer systems. And Alison Jones, with a few specialists from the UK, will be leading on that session. We will be sending the announcement, but we know it's so important for Uzbekistan universities now. We will be sharing UK and wider international experience in this regard. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again very soon. And happy Easter to those who will be celebrating it in the UK. Bye-bye and take care. Thanks to our interpreters, of course. Wonderful job as ever. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.